Hello students, today we shall be taking up A Legend of the Northland by Phoebe Cary. This has been taken from your Class 9 NCERT book, Beehive. Now Cary was an American poet. She, along with her sister Alice, published their poems in their teens itself. However, it was not until 1850, after their work had been noticed by Edgar Allan Poe and John Greenleaf Whittier, that they published their book Poems of Alice and Phoebe Cary. Both the sisters moved to New York. They were quite active in the early days of the women's rights movements, and with Phoebe Cary serving as an assistant editor for Susan B. Anthony's newspaper, The Revolution. She published two volumes of poetry. That is, the first one is Poems and Parodies, that was in the year 1854, Poems of Faith, Hope and Love in the year 1868, and she died in 1871. A Legend of the Northland Children narrates the legend of an old lady who angered Saint Peter because of her greed. Okay, so A Legend of the Northland is a traditional popular story which is composed in the style of a ballad. So before we begin the recitation and explanation, let us understand what is a legend and what is a ballad. Now, legend. Legend is a traditional story, sometimes popularly regarded as historical, but not authenticated. For example, the legend of King Arthur is that he banished all snakes from Ireland. Okay. Now, let us come to ballad. So, what's a ballad? Ballad is a poem or a song narrating a story in short stanzas. This poem fits well into the category of a ballad because it is composed in simple language with four-line stanzas. It also has an important moral lesson to convey through an old story. Also, this poem has a musical rhythm to this, and this you can observe from the rhyme scheme itself. All right, so there is a mention of Northland. The title says A Legend of the Northland. So what is this? Where is this? Okay, so in this particular poem, we are talking of Northland, which is near North Pole. All right, and Eskimo tribe lives here, and this area is also known as Arctic region. Okay, children. Now there is one more place, in the northern part, northernmost part of New Zealand, which is also known as Northland. So we are not talking of that Northland, but we are talking of the one which is near North Pole. Just remember that, okay? Now, as we mentioned earlier, that this poem has a musical rhythm, and we can see this, we can observe this from the rhyme scheme itself, and the rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B. All right. Now, for those children who do not know how to detect or how to tell the rhyme scheme in a given poem, this is how we decide, children. We see the last word of each line in the poem. Okay. For instance, in the first line, if I say the first stanza, away, away in the Northland. Okay, Northland, where the hours of the day are few, few, and the nights are so long in winter, winter, that they cannot sleep them through. So now let us observe these last words of each line. Northland, okay, we call it A. Few, we call it B because there is no rhyming between the two. Winter, yes, again there is no rhyming between the two, so we call it C. And through rhymes with few, and few was B, so it becomes A, B, C, B. So the rhyme scheme we have already understood. The poem is in the form of a ballad with four-lined stanzas, and each stanza follows the pattern of the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B. Now we'll quickly recite the whole poem first, and then we'll go on to the explanation stanza wise. Okay. A Legend of the Northland. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bear cubs in their funny furry clothes. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe 'tis true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching, just as he did, he came to the door of a cottage in travelling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Therefore she needed another, and still a smaller one, but it looked when she turned it over as large as the first had done. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. For she said, my cakes that seem too small, when I eat of them myself, are yet too large to give away, so she put them on the shelf. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter, and fire to keep you warm. Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard, dry wood. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. So now you know that this poem narrates the legend of an old lady who angered the good Saint Peter because of her greed. Okay, so now let us start with the poem. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. Okay, so away, away, the poet starts with repetition of the word away because he wants to emphasize that this place is actually very, very far off in the Northland, and therefore it is extremely cold, where the hours of the day are few. Okay, so because its position is such that the sun's rays reach for a lesser time, so that is why the hours of the day are few and the nights are quite long. That they cannot, they refers to people who live there. Okay, they refers to the people who live there, they cannot sleep them through. So now there is repetition in the first line. Then you can see that there is enjambment. Now what is an enjambment? Now if you have not come across this particular word, first thing is, one thing I would like to tell you about the spelling, both ways. Okay, if you put e after b, then also it is correct. If you do not put e after b, then also it is correct. So both the spellings are accepted. Now it basically means the continuation of a sentence without a pause beyond the end of a line, okay, or stanza. So for instance, in the last two lines you can see that it is continued, but there is no pause here. Okay, there is no this thing, the sentence is being continued, but there is no pause. Okay, so this is enjambment. Repetition is there, enjambment is there, and even alliteration is there. That, they, this is alliteration. Okay, where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bear cubs in their funny furry clothes. So the image of the children, how are they dressed up, was there in on the previous slide. You must have seen. So basically, what do people do here? They tie the reindeer, okay, to a sledge so that it can be used for transportation. because there is no other way, as you know, there is no other way of going from one place to another. Okay, and the children look like bear cubs. This is a simile. In their funny furry clothes, this is an alliteration, and there is an again enjambment in the last two lines. They refers to the parents, elderly people. Okay, they tell them a curious story. I don't believe tis true. Tis true means it is true. Okay, I don't believe it is true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. So they refers to the parents or elders who are living in Northland. They tell them, them here refers to children. Okay, so they tell them an interesting story, and then the poet says that she does not believe that it is true. So even though the legend may or may not be true, the poet wants to narrate it to you. And why does she want to narrate it to us? Because it contains a moral lesson. Okay. Now the story starts, children. Uh, okay, in the stanza, there is a word curious. Okay, the word curious has been used by the poet. All right. So, because the truthfulness, the tenacity of the poem has not been established. Like we told you in the beginning, when we were talking about, when we were defining the legend, that it may or may not be authenticated. Okay. So, the truthfulness is not or has not been established, and that is why the word curious is used here. Okay. Once, when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it, preaching just as he did, you know. Okay, so now here, stanza 4, the legend begins that it is about the good Saint Peter. Saint Peter refers to, children, one of the followers of Jesus Christ. He was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. Okay, so once he came down from heaven to the world below means earth, to preach the word of God. He traveled and wandered to fulfill his missionary purpose. Okay, he came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Okay, hearth refers to the fireplace. Okay, so one day he reached the door of a cottage where a little woman was baking cake on the fireplace. And being faint with fasting, another alliteration, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So the good saint was famished, he was tired, and therefore he asked the little woman for a piece of cake from from her store. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. So the woman baked a small cake for him, but while it was being baked, she looked at it and felt that it was too large to be given away to the good saint. Therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. So now, this is a greedy woman. Okay, so this little miser woman needed a smaller dough now. But again, when she looked at it, she thought that this cake was as big as the previous one. So, because her intentions are not good, her basic nature is greedy. She is greedy and she doesn't want to part away with anything which she has. Okay. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat. Okay. So she rolled it flat. She kept on rolling it till it was completely flat and baked it thin as a wafer. But she couldn't part with even that. So then she took a tiny scrap of dough. She rolled it flat. She baked it and it was as thin as a wafer. There is an alliteration. So the woman was so greedy, children, that she could not part with the thinnest cake that she had baked. Imagine. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself, and yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. Now, let us observe and analyze her comment on the size of her cake. She says, when I have to eat my cake, yes, they seem small. On the contrary, when I have to give them to someone, they seem too large to be given away for charity. So her narrow thinking, her self-centered approach is quite evident in this comment of hers. Okay. Then good Saint Peter grew angry. Remember, the poet said that he was faint, and being faint with fasting. So he was, since he had not eaten anything, he was very weak. Okay. So obviously he's hungry, he's expecting something to eat, and he is not getting anything to eat. And he is observing this greedy woman's behavior. He's observing each and everything. Okay, so even saints know everything. Even if he's not observing her, he knows what is going on in this lady's mind. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. Okay, so now the good Saint Peter, who had been waiting for so long, became really angry, became furious. Now, such a woman, okay, because now he had not eaten anything since morning. So, this kind of behavior of the greedy woman angered him, and he told the woman. Let us see what he says. Now, such a woman refers to this greedy, selfish, miserly woman who is devoid of human feelings of pity, compassion, and charity. Okay? He said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm. So he tells this woman that you are extremely selfish and you do not deserve to stay in human form. You do not deserve food, shelter, and fire. And here, children, please note that real human nature is not like what this woman possesses. Okay, the inherent nature of human beings is to love and care for each other. Okay, now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. So it happened, the woman turned into a woodpecker, children, because the good saint, had cursed her, and he said that she would become a woodpecker who would build her own nest by digging holes in the hard and dry trunks of trees for her scanty food, for her meager food. Okay, and then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. And as he said, as the saint said, it happened. The woman turned into a woodpecker instantly, okay? There was just no delay, and through the chimney she went without getting a chance to say anything. And we should understand this, that she was devoid of all the qualities, the good human qualities that should be possessed by a good human being. So she was punished and turned into a woodpecker. All right, and then the poet describes the woodpecker, that she had a scarlet is that red color cap, okay, which you can see in the image on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned black as a coal in the flame. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. So again, we have repetition, we have alliteration, and this is what the legend was, the legend of Northland. Now, the main poetic devices that we came across were these four. All right, alliteration, repetition, simile, and enjambment. You can just go through the detailed explanations of all these literary devices. Now is the time to ponder. Okay, and we saw that Saint Peter believed that God has blessed human beings with certain comforts such as food and shelter, so it is expected that fellow human beings help each other. So this legend is basically a reminder to all those who believe in only gathering, accumulating, and not sharing it in the form of charity. So what is your take? What is your understanding of the poem? Okay, it is important that you interpret the poem on your own and discuss your viewpoint on it in the class. My take, yes, I will discuss it definitely. I feel, and it is true also, that the inherent nature of a human being is positive. As you sow, so shall you reap. So in this lifetime, do as many good deeds as you can. The blessings that we have as human beings, for example, that of life, food, shelter, these should not be taken for granted, and we must have compassion for each other, for our fellow human beings. All right. I hope the poem was clear. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Thank you for watching.